afternoon, and welcome to the second webinar of the Nonprofit Financial Commons. I'm Ruth McCambridge, and I'm one of those who have been working on the Financial Commons for the past 2 years. The Financial Commons is a new knowledge sharing and peer consultation platform for nonprofit financial leaders. Here is where you will find and also help provide the expert knowledge in nonprofit finance that can only come from being in the trenches and practicing. I want to encourage each of you to register now if you have not already done so to get the full benefit of this event, because more will come later on our online forums, and we'll put the registration link in the chat. That leads you to a place where we'll keep conversations going about the topics that we address in these events. All of our topics, including this one, come directly from the participants. And in this case, it came from two of the panelists who you see here with us today. And I think first was Dominique, and she said some things that absolutely knocked my socks off, and Marvin kind of chimed in. And as we talked about the practice of the really skillful nonprofit strategist, wherever they may sit in the organization, we realize that this is a role that's just filled with a potential for power and joy. And those are really the words Dominique brought to it. Marvin then brought some other words, and then we talked to Beth, who is very much on the same page, but this has resonated with any of us who have approached a very sticky financial situation in our own nonprofits. The thing that interested me about it was it brought up the issue, this issue of, and I'm going to use a French word, bricolage. And bricolage it's a word that's used in management, and it basically what it means is that you grab everything that might possibly have a use, and you put it together, you mix it, you figure out how it can serve the purpose that you want it to serve, and you make it work towards your vision. And that's the real work of the nonprofit strategist. We very seldom are facing a situation in which we have a very straightforward financial and revenue proposition. There's downsides to everything. We have to mix and match. We also have to take into account a lot of social capital issues of reputation, and networks that we can put to use, and in our influences. All of that matters hugely. So the work of the nonprofit strategist, as I said, is a kind of a bricolage, and it's an art form. That bricolage is a term that's used in art as, you making art of found objects, which all objects are obviously found. So our three panelists today are Marvin Webb. Say hi, Marvin. The CFO of LGBTQ Funders, Dominique Jones, the Executive Director of Global Kids, and Beth Haney, the Director of Finance and Operations at Avenues for Youth. They all know this space of nonprofit financial strategy intimately, and they have any number of stories to tell about their experience in making it work. So with that, Marvin, I'm going to hand it over to you, and you're going to facilitate this first part.
All right.
And welcome everybody again. We're thrilled to have you here.
Thanks, Ruth. Welcome, folks from all over. Great to see you. Again, my name is Marvin Webb. I'm with Funders for LGBTQ Issues, CFO there. My pronouns are he and him. I think to start us off, I just want to set the stage. First, I thank you for your work. I thank you for your service. I think that most oftentimes we in the financial bubble, we're like hunched over on an organ and then we're in the corner, and then the music's going and nobody knows who's playing the music. That's us, right? So I want to acknowledge that, because we're kind of like the foundations of our organizations, but we're kind of like, it's almost like I feel like we're Marsha, or not Marsha, we're Jan. Jan's like Marsha, right? We're like the Jans. So I want to acknowledge that. And if you think about your work, because you all were mentioning what brings you joy, like from budgets to cash flow and financial strategy and dashboards and payroll. I think those are great. And I love all of those as well. Like I love reading a good fresh 990 in my rocking chair with a glass of Chardonnay. Bizarre, but good. As my children and husband laugh at me like I'm some kind of nerd going wild. Rogue parents with a glass of Chardonnay in a rocking chair. Who knew? But if you think of I want to maybe frame it, if we can all think of ourselves as artists in different pathways on our journey, right? Some of us are newer to the work of finance, some of us are veterans. And in that artistry trajectory, you will improve your technique over time, right? And you will also learn tricks, either to take care of your instrument. Let's say if you're a dancer, you also want to improve your instrument and your technique as a dancer. Like let's say you're dancing for Alvin Ailey, just for today. And then you also want to make sure you don't hurt yourself, right? You don't want to actually dance so much that you're exhausted because you can't do the next show tomorrow, right? So you have to take care of yourself because this is a sustainable career you want to have. So if you're an artist, right, you want to actually find, there's joy, such joy in being an artist. And I do consider myself, and as you as well, artist in this. So I want to thank you for that again. But I think that sometimes in our brain, sometimes as finance folks, we may forget that one, we are artists, and two, there can be joy in our work. Right, so I want to name that. And as you all mentioned, budgeting, cash flow, financial strategy, dashboards, and PayPal. I mean, sorry, not PayPal, but payroll. True story. I was trying to run payroll because the regular staff member who runs payroll was sick. So I was back up. And for some reason, because I was not sitting in my rocking chair and having lots of wine, but I messed up my login. And I was supposed to run payroll that day. It was the next day to run. And I couldn't sign in and it blocked me out. And so being the operations finance person, I did, you know what? Let me go to the phone app, and I ran payroll on that phone app. Right? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Being an artist, we figure out how to get the job done, even if we're blocked out, even if the budget is due, we figure out how to make it work. So that's what I mean by that's the artistry that many of us are doing that we may not realize. That's like some serious art, right? Because in the end, I figured out, oh my God, I can't call ADP because ADP takes forever to get through. And it was 4 o'clock, like payroll had to be run by 5. And I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I figured it out. So in that same framework, there is a world of financial strategy that many of us have done, from the PPP work that we've done to the ERC work that some of us are even still trying to figure out. All that stuff, as well as your normal things of budgeting and figuring out cash flow and what's going to happen. And when the ED says, I want to hire 16 people, you're like, well, you have to talk to the development team, like, where's that cash flow coming from? So all those things we juggle that I think that is unrecognized labor that's normal for us, that we may not assume that's really actually an amazing piece of work that we leverage and hold. Right? And I think that sometimes we don't understand that we actually, like me doing payroll was totally, as I was a dancer, that would be improvisation to a T, right? And by the way, my husband was also yelling at me because dinner was ready. And I'm like, I have to run payroll, right? So, because I work from home, so those things happen. Those with you with kids and animals, you know, your spouses or children or animals, they don't recognize you're working. For them, you're at home, so you're free, you're available. But I do want to start there. I thank you again for your time and your work. And I don't want you to forget that in this work that you are artists. And sometimes artists need breaks. And that's okay, right? Which means sometimes you may need to ask for resources that you get support for your work. Like if that means another consultant or a part-time worker, you may need to ask for that and sometimes fight for that, because usually more often than not, our departments and silos are underutilized and underrated and undersupported. And we are often supported last. So I'm trying to remind you in 2023, ask for what you want, put your Rihanna hat on. And so Rihanna would say, hey, I need some support here. But it can be that, and that's okay too. And then I will pass it to Dominique.
Well, Marvin, I don't know how to follow that, because as a wannabe dancer, I feel like I should, you kind of speak into my spirit, in the sense of, some of the work that we do is really, it's very choreographed, but you can have variations, and improvisation, and really help to improve the performance, for the long term. So I feel your analogy and your connection with the work. And I would say, Ruth, I'm honored that you were listening to me and heard me, and in the fact that I do find joy, not just in financial work and budgeting and the likes, but I find joy in being a leader in the not-for-profit sector. It has been, I was a reluctant leader to kind of step in the roles that I have over the last few years. But all along the way, I think that I actually built a toolkit, and what did you call it? The German term, bricolage to be able to be in this moment that for many of us has been a challenging few years. But I although we struggled through, and some days were not as great as others, we have gotten to this point in 2022, about to go into 2023. But I think that we're better for it as not-for-profit leaders, because and better for what awaits us, if we listen to the financial reports and the Fed, that because we've gone through these experiences. I will share just a little bit about, kind of how finance and budgeting has really been kind of my source of, I'll say I'm not an accountant. I hated math. I really, growing up, it was just, I had a fear of anything numbers. And some of my fear around numbers were not that I couldn't compute things, but it felt complex. And then I also thought about, do numbers really accurately depict what is needed, or they do accurately depict, but people interpret things, particularly in statistics and the like. And so all of those things would always just make me very nervous when I got around numbers. And I remember having one of my first jobs out of graduate school, I had to look at spreadsheets, and again, my anxieties and my phobias kind of kicked in, and I just kind of fell apart in presentations related to when we had to present budgets or justify certain expenses. But then I had a formative experience actually working in community economic development. I work for one of the major intermediaries in the United States, but also New York City. And I started to underwrite affordable housing deals. And I will say that although it was not the most exciting job, I learned a great deal. Everything is sources and uses. Everything is revenue and expense. Everything, those are the things that where your money's coming from. You have money to spend it. If you know what you have to spend on, you got to go get some money. And so, it takes I don't say it takes a long time for people to get, it took a long time for me to get that, right? It took a long time for me to really understand it and embrace it in a way that would, I think, inform the rest of my career. And once I started to understand a pro forma and how it's it's put together and how and how that kind of tells the story of a project or a deal, then I really started to get into it. And I found that the folks who worked in finance, so shout out to all of you on this webinar that are really our CFOs, are people who do accounts payable, accounts receivable, the whole nine. I would say that you really are the stars in organizations like ours, because you help to make miracles happen every day. And I learned that and realized that just sitting at the feet of CFOs and other finance staff in the subsequent jobs and roles that I have had. And they've taught me a lot about not just the numbers, but also how to stay calm in crisis, and how to be able to really look at the situation, but also understand there are lots of assumptions, and there are lots of, there's lots of doors you can go through to help to get to what your ultimate goal is, which is to meet mission. And that, I think, helped to allay my anxieties around finance, and then start to just get in it and revel in it and take joy out of working with the numbers. I tell my team that your budgets tell your story. I think we've heard, people talk about budgets are moral documents. Budgets are also really talks a lot about what's happening, when it's happening, why it didn't happen, the whole. And if for people who are not, they don't necessarily connect to the quantitative aspect of it, I think thinking about budgets and finance as a qualitative exercise actually will bring more people in, and actually have your conversation becomes a little different. And so, in my journey, that's kind of how I've approached it. I think one of the founders of the Financial Commons, Hilda, I think I found my spirit guide when I met her, because she talks lots about the fact that, the budget tells your story, the tools. And so from there, it just, I'm here today because I got that religion. And ultimately, my hope is that I'll be able to dance a great improvisational dance with Marvin and others, so that we can move our collective missions forward.
Thanks for that, Dominique.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Beth.
Hey. I'm just laughing because when that survey came up, the one option that we didn't have that would have been under other, that totally, like, my staff knows, the time of year that I love the most is actually the audit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I love an audit. And my staff is like,
I'm gonna
really?
put that down too,
I
Beth,
love
but
it.
I thought that's a little.
And my auditors love that. And I tell them every year, I'm like, oh, yay, it's audit time. And to me, like, there's nothing I like more than organizing a closet. And the audit, as far as I'm concerned, is our financial, like, closet, right? And I'm organizing it. And at the end of an audit, I know exactly, like, why this number is this and why this number is this. And it just makes me delighted to no end that I have that I've gone through that process and I have that knowledge now, and that empowers me and therefore the rest of my organization. With now here's what we have and here's what we need to do. So I work for a small, well, I guess mid-sized, about $3 to $4 million organization, nonprofit in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, where we have a snowstorm going on right now. So, and we serve youth experiencing homelessness. And I actually do love numbers. I've always loved numbers, but my training has not been finance, and it has not been an accountant. I actually have my PhD in social psychology, which I was trained as a quantitative researcher essentially. But in the beginning of my career, I am really driven by mission, and I'm really driven by my values. And I kind of assumed that I had to be on the program side to be a change agent. And so I spent a lot of time doing that. Actually, I worked early in my career for a child advocacy organization, using my research skills on behalf of those goals. But it didn't come naturally to me, and it didn't give me joy. It actually took energy from me each day to do that work. And it was later in my career that I realized that what gives me energy and what comes naturally to me is logistics and operations and finding efficiencies. And when you're doing that role in a nonprofit, pretty quickly you have to understand the finances as well. And then I remembered, and so like I love jigsaw puzzles, right? Like I love trying to like find out, put out how do all the pieces go together. And I remembered that I love algebra. I just adore algebra. So like both sides have to be equal. And if they're not, why not? Which is basically a jigsaw puzzle, right? It's like figuring out the like, why not? And that's essentially nonprofit financing right there, right? So I am a student of Propel for Nonprofits. I cannot say enough about this organization based in Minnesota. Kate Barr is the executive director, is also one of the founders of this of the nonprofit Financial Commons. And Propel is really about taking people who are not finance people and making them helping them to grow, right? And become that. And I absolutely like every seminar they've ever offered, every webinar, I mean, I've done it all. I've taken all that they say. I've learned things from them, like budgets are just narratives. They're just, they're just as Dominique was saying. And it's not rocket science. None of this is rocket science. And what's really important is that you've got this huge community of collaborators, and you can just call on any of them at any point and say to them, hey, I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I'm sure you've been through this before. How did you handle it? What did you do? Help me out. Every from the like the big strategic to the really like, how do I actually make QuickBooks do this thing that I need it to do so that my balance sheet shows up correctly? So that's what I've done. I would say that kind of my most recent kind of example of where did I find joy, and kind of Dominique spoke to this in terms of like the numbers can help you kind of take a chaotic moment and calm you down. I started in this position in January of 2020, which was a crazy time to start a new job, but especially a crazy time in the space that we work in, right? In the homeless sector, as it kind of overnight, this moral thing became a public health issue. And we were inundated, and I'm so very, very grateful, but donors of all kinds, right? Individuals, foundations, government, everybody called us up and said, what do you need? How can we help? What do you need? And I was like, I don't know where the bathroom is. I don't know what we need, right? Plus, like I've never been through a pandemic before, so I have no idea what my organization needs. And my development team, like every day they were coming to me saying, we've got a new funder that wants to give us money. What do we need? And I was like, and in the meantime, the way our organization was dealing with this issue was actually, we're kind of like clamping down, right? We were kind of saying like, these are the youth we're serving right now, and we're going to keep them safe, and we're going to keep our staff safe, which meant we weren't really creating a lot of new expenses for ourselves. We actually, in some ways, were kind of limiting our expenses right off the bat, because we were just trying to kind of like keep everybody safe. At the same time, I was trying to go through the budget for the FY21, and my board was completely freaked out about the effect of COVID on the economy, because we all kind of just saw the economy stop. And so as I was trying to create the FY21 budget, they were like, be as conservative as possible. Assume that we're going to have no money at all next year. And I was like, okay, it's just that every single day somebody calls me up and wants to give us money. So I don't know what to do with those two things at the same time, and how to reconcile those two things. And I was also trying to, like, as part of the leadership of this organization, figure out like, what are we doing about, when someone enters, like, who's allowed to come into our building? And I was helping with all of the COVID response decisions we had to be making. So it was just we all experienced that working during that time period. The way I found my calm, the way I found my joy was Propel for Nonprofits at that point put on a webinar about scenario planning. And they gave us a spreadsheet that was really like, put in these numbers, then what are your assumptions? Now make some different assumptions, right? So assume next year, like make 3 different scenarios about what could happen. And so we did. We very methodically went through like 40% of our fundings from government, and a lot of that was already set for the following year. But we could still make some assumptions about like, well, the local government's probably going to be affected by this. And then we could take our private foundation, our foundations and individuals, and we could say, what if funding goes down by 15%? What if funding goes down by 25%? And then we could look at our impact in terms of the program and the organization and say, what if we had to pay staff an extra X number of dollars per hour for 9 months next year to come in, because they're coming into a building that potentially COVID's in. And so we have to give them extra dollars for that, for coming into those buildings. That kind of gave us all of the like answers that we needed in terms of like, how bad do we think it could get? And what are our current resources? And there was such amazing joy and relief for me and my executive director in realizing that actually, because of the generosity during the beginning of the pandemic, we were sitting in a good enough place that actually when we built out a pretty bad scenario about FY21, we kind of said, we actually think we've got enough unrestricted net assets right now to cover that horrible situation. Because the reality was if we were going to have to really not look to our unrestricted net assets, it was going to be cutting an entire program. And the board didn't want to hear that, but they did want to hear that we were thinking drastically. And so that was really helpful to be able to come back to them very calmly and say, actually, we think for FY21, in the worst case scenario, we're going to be okay. Now, here's also the things that we're going to do to keep track as the year goes on to make sure that we are tracking the way we thought we would. And here's the ways that we will pivot if we need to. But it really gave us that sense of like, okay, all right, we're going to be fine. We're going to make our way out of this. So that's kind of how I would kind of speak to, again, that topic of like, how does it all come together? And yeah.
Thanks, Beth and Dominique, for that. I think I'll synthesize some of your thoughts. So Dominique, you shared thoughts about, finding your Yoda, finding your people who can share brilliance that you can take back to your organization, which I think is great. And also learn your business of your organization, because then if you understand your business and the complexities of it, then you can actually make different choices than if you don't understand your business, right? Which I think is really, really to the heart of what finance is, right? As well as to the heart of what a CEO needs to be strategic, and the board and the finance committee, right? And Beth, you, I love this. With your audit connection, you brought up the Marie Kondo of auditing. So I appreciate that. Yes, I love that. Love a good closet. And you brought up scenario planning, which is also similar to learning your business, because once you learn your business, then you can scenario plan and then make choices strategically too. So you've heard a lot of strategy, folks, and this is this is what brings all of us joy, right? Figuring things out, crossing the finish line, giving your CEO and board of directors, you choose A, B, or C. This is what I found. Make a choice, and then you move forward with your choices. And then you come back and evaluate the choice. And now we want to move into Dominique and Beth. If you can discuss some of the pre-event questions, one or two that spoke to you, and I will go first. There was a conversation or someone who said they applied for a shuttered venue operators grant and the employee retention credit and advocated to push for that. They put in a lot of extra time and energy without the strong support of the board, who felt it was more of a long shot and not the best use of the time. This is where it gets good, okay? These two funds brought in the equivalent of 50% of their annual operating costs in 1 year. That's bomb diggity. So kudos to you, whoever you are. Congratulations. I'll talk about two things. The employee retention credit, I won't go into what that is. You can Google that, but it's a great resource if you have not had access to it to figure out. There is some complications or differences with PPP and the ERC and how you navigate that. But that's a great resource for free government money. If you can get it, I say go for it, whether it's shuttered venue or differential percentage, which are two different frames of it. I will say there is, I think, the elephant in the room for my organization is we have learned that all of us have different historical values and relationships when it comes to money. And because of that, whether you come from a food stamp history or farm history or getting free food or free not, or free value lunch, or not coming from that world or coming from a private school world, and how your parents and how whoever reared you, their relationship to money, and then that all of those historical activities impact how you make money choices. Sometimes in my organization, sometimes I found that certain staff and board members were making choices based on that historical knowledge without acknowledging that they had that historical knowledge, and actually making choices out of fear because that's where they came from. For example, my husband is really tight with money. I am not. I'm like, yeah, buy the shirt. He's like, how much is the shirt? Like, I'm like, just buy the shirt, child, just buy the shirt. But he's like, how much is the shirt? If it's over $15, don't buy the shirt, right? And that's a different value. And so we have to navigate that as a couple. But I think that in an organization, sometimes, for example, my boss did not want to go for PPP funding when we could have. And so I went for it behind his back because I wasn't gonna let this free money go. I told him later, he's like, well, why didn't you tell me? I'm like, because I know you're gonna say no. He's like, well, how much is it? I'm like, it's this. He's like, oh, that's cute. Let's keep the money. I'm like, see, but that's a story. Like he was coming from, oh, we don't need it. Or I think we don't need it, but maybe we don't. We didn't ask, well, we didn't need it. But I said it's free money. And so was the ERC, and we got that as well. But even the PPP, as we did it, it was so confusing, as many of us found out. I was confused. I applied to 4 banks. I'm like, they're just going to figure it out. And my boss is like, but aren't you going to get, we're going to get arrested? I'm like, nobody's going to, the IRS not going to arrest us. Let's calm down. And if we get double paid, we can return it. One by one, each bank said, oh, you already have a number. We'll close your application. So I just want to make that clear that sometimes our teams, including us, may come from different value systems as it relates to money. Totally fine. I need you to keep those value systems. Those are important to you. But also sometimes you may have to analyze that and put that on pause if you're making a major decision for the organization, which may need a organizational based value system than an individual based value system, because you may use, from my mind, you can't use the same value system of buying a house for you and your spouse and your children than you can for your organization. Right? They both have levels of conservatism and risk, but they operate differently because they're 2 different things you're doing, if that makes sense, right? And so to the folks who got the 50% of their budget with the ERC and PP money, again, bravo. And I'll pass it to you, Dominique.
Well, I think when I read through a lot of the questions before the pre-event questions, a lot of what I heard are about how do we help to develop staff internally as well as external, our boards and others around the budget, and how do we help build those competencies, understand the risks. I think there's even a question in the chat right now or in the Q&A that really speaks to this idea that everybody is coming to the table with different levels of understanding, as Marvin said, around budgeting and financial management. And some people have different understandings about not-for-profit financial management versus for-profit financial management, which in a way is still the same. I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you, like not-for-profits are businesses. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. We just have a double bottom line. So, but the challenge ultimately is that a lot of people, I don't want to make a judgment because that's not always true. I think that we're hyper focused on mission, but we don't really spend the time to talk about what it costs to achieve the mission and how we're going to manage resources to be able to get there. And our boards, our staff, I think that because they come to the table with different experiences, different levels of understanding, you as the leader or the financial are sitting in the middle of that. And so you have to be in a position to be able to be multilingual, to be able to kind of create different scenarios, help people understand use different scenarios or different approaches to help bring people to where you are. So you're really the teacher ultimately, as you have the information. So you have to organize information in the way that people can see it and hear it. So I find myself being an executive director really engaging with staff differently about budgets, and talking a bit more about with my staff, particularly program staff, I'm always talking about what are your goals as in your work? How do your goals, and then what are the things that we need to do to get to those goals? ultimately you can monetize those activities, and that helps you to get to a certain point. But I think that has helped me help my staff really understand that. With board members, I think it is about education, but it's also really being clear upfront about risks around different decisions, cost of different decisions. But you also have to find really strong board allies. I actually, in my previous job, I had the most amazing board treasurer who understood finance and in the most holistic standpoint, but also was also willing to learn about not-for-profits and how we operate. But because she was open to that, she became my ambassador in the boardroom to talk about the decisions that we needed to make. So a lot of this is relational. A lot of so part of it is everybody's got to get to a place where they are building strong relationships with folks, building alliances with folks to be, not alliances like Survivor, but allies that can help you navigate and pose the key questions. You as a leader, executive director, CFO, whatever, you don't always have to be the one to pose the question. And I think that's a common mistake that many of us make, because we have to be the erudite person who knows everything, whatever. No, have your board members ask the salient questions. Have your board, and if you have strong allies, they will ask the questions for you, or they'll kind of help to have conversations that really carry your concern. So again, in moving and understanding your working through your fund, it's not just about having the numbers in it. It's about building the relationships, getting allies, getting people to kind of engage so that you can move forward. And then also really building and developing your team. Does that get at what you were looking for, Marvin? All right.
I'll just build off of that. I was going to talk about relationships as well. And one of the things that struck me as I was reading kind of through the information that came in ahead of time was the word build continuing trust jumped out at me. And because of who I am, automating processes jumped out at me. There's nothing I love more, including organizing a closet, than to find efficiencies, right? To make our lives just one teeny bit easier. And so my operations staff that I oversee, I talk to them a lot about so our role in this mission-oriented organization is not the direct mission, right? We don't directly work with the youth, but our mission, the way that we fulfill that is that we make our colleagues who do work directly with our youth, their lives one notch easier every single day. And if that's what we do every single day, then that's a win, right? Whether that's bringing in resources, whether that's helping to understand what resources we have, whether that's taking an administrative barrier and making it just a teeny bit easier with automation, whether that's empowering my program staff with Divvy credit cards. I cannot say enough about them. Because you can give each of your staff member a credit card, but it only has like $50 on it. And so it reduces your liability, how much liability each person has, right? But that gives them then more empowerment to make the decisions that they need to be making on behalf of our youth, therefore fulfilling our mission. So I tell my staff, I'm like, I don't jump out of bed in the morning and I'm not like, woohoo, I get to pay the electric bill today. That's awesome. I can't wait, right? But I do that, and I do jump out of bed because I'm like, I get to do something that makes sure the lights are going to be on so that our youth have a home where they can trust is a safe place for them, where the lights are going to be on, the food is going to be there, and staff are going to come and they're going to be able to serve them in their best capacity possible. So for me, it's really about how do I work with my program and my development staff and within my operations and the finance team to be making sure that we're taking part in that mission work in our own way, and that's what we're bringing to the table. That's what our superpowers are. Like, I am actually would not be a good youth worker, but I'm really, really good at organizing that financial closet, right? So that's the superpower that I bring to the organization, and recognizing that for myself, but also recognizing that with my peers and saying to them, like, this is how I'm helping you hopefully make things a teeny bit easier. And they might be like, yeah, you don't make things easy enough for me, Beth, but that's certainly my goal each day. And again, automating processes, working with them to say like, okay, what is the paperwork that you're currently doing there? And is there a way for us to like have you input that data one less time, right? Is there a way for those systems to talk to each other so that you can spend more time not actually working on the computer, putting in numbers, but instead doing the youth work that we need you to do. So that's kind of what jumped out at me. And again, it's about relationship building internally.
Thanks for that, lovely souls. I do want to, what I heard, to document our process here. What I did here is, I often refrain, my children can't stand that, but that's okay. It's my issue. What I heard is, who do you date financially? Right? We all date financially our auditor. Let's just be real. We all date them. And I think we all date financially our treasurer, right? You should be in your treasurer. Your treasurer should be in your DMs and your, whatever the young people call it, and your conversations, and you should be in their conversations. And then I think we should be dating our development team, so we know it. And you should train your development team what they know about cash flow. They should know your cash flow and vice versa.
That is essential.
Right.
That is,
So right. Go ahead, Dominique.
I was just going to say, that is essential. Your development team has to really understand cash flow, because that really helps them around the timing, and actually making really good projections. Like if they don't know when their grants are coming in or with their events, or that's a no-no. So I think that's really essential. Aside, next to your CFO, your development director, it has to really get it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And you should be dating, obviously, your executive director, your CEO. That's a given. And finally, what I think some of us may miss, you need to have a comrade in arms in finance, whether that's a nonprofit assistance fund or wherever your home state is. Find your home state nonprofit group that has a finance committee, a finance group where you can ask questions, because those groups will tell you when the next ERC is, and you won't have to look for it. Those groups will tell you how to navigate the difference between how do you fit your PPP, how do you fit your ERC around your PP, how do you wrap your ERC around your PPP so you can get the best money, and you won't have to look at it, and you won't have to do what I did. You won't have to attend 14 darn ERC webinars to figure out how to wrap your ERC around your PPP, right? I did share that information with the groups that I belong to, though, right? But that's the nature of those groups. So there is a level of commonality with us making sure that we are around groups that not necessarily serve us, but this is like, to me, that's like your church, your community, and those folks will actually help ground you and actually push your own work forward as an artist in finance. All right. Any other comments, Beth or Dominique, before we move on?
No, I would just really echo that. I mean, I think one of the things that all my colleagues across the Twin Cities know is that I'm not afraid to be like, hi, yeah, I don't understand how to do this. How do I do this? What do I do now? You've done this before. Like I ask questions in fact, it's one of the things my auditors laugh about, just because I'm like, yeah, I will call you all year long, because I will be saying to you all year long, what do you want me to do about this? How should I do this? What's the best way for me to, make sure that this is taken care of in a way so that when we get to the audit, you're not like, oh, Beth, no. So ask lots of questions and demand the answers, really.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, when I mean date, folks, I mean like you're calling the auditor every quarter, even for a check-in, especially when there's a different ASU standard coming down the pike. Like, what do I need to do? How should I book this? Am I doing it wrong? For me, I always give my audit, whenever I think I've done trouble, that's the first thing I give them. I said, check this first, because I think this is wrong. And I think it's shenanigans, but just check it first. And they're like, no, it's a little bit wrong, but not that wrong. I'm like, okay. Just so I kind of out myself. I'm like, well, I think this is wrong. I talked to you, but I still think it's wrong. Check it first, kind of thing. I think that also lets the auditor know that you're on their side too, right? And you set up the relationship so you both are successful, right? And also your management letter will be smaller, which I think we all love in the end, right? And I think, Ruth, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Great. So, I mean, I just heard so much there, and the comment about having somebody to call all the time, and knowing who you can call for what kind of thing and not being embarrassed about it is so essential. I always tell the story about when I was 21 years old, and I could, in fact, add to some extent. And so this organization that we created, I was made the finance director of it. And people kept asking me, so when do you have to do the 990? And I kept thinking in my head, I don't want to look stupid, but I don't really know what that is. It's like there's no stupid questions here. And if somebody's talking about something, some detail of your business, that you don't understand why they're talking about that to such a great extent, you better make it your business to find out. Because it probably means something, and it probably means something profound, that you need to pay attention to. And asking your peers stupid questions is going to surface all kinds of possibilities for you that you didn't even know were there to be grabbed. So I've had a lot of experiences myself where someone has recommended to me some kind of a tool to use, that is like the scenario planning tool, which I loved what you said actually there, Beth, is that you wanted to prove to your board that you had thought drastically. And I think that is so wise, because if a board senses that you're being optimistic, they're going to immediately take the opposite role, and try to play a balancing role with you. And so unless you can prove that you have also thought in that drastic way that they have thought, and that you've looked at all of the potential options, they're necessarily going to immediately click into the role to protect the organization of being more conservative. So how do you figure out how not to drive them there? And how not to drive them there is to do that drastic thinking yourself. And then to keep the other stuff surface. So I just thought that was absolutely brilliant. So I wanted to ask you though, and I've asked you this earlier, so you should have it on the top of your head. And I think I'm going to go with you first, Dominique, because as soon as I asked you, well, what's the process or the tool that really was revelatory for you, that really gave you a sense of, oh my God, now I understand. You said to me, pro formas, like that. So maybe you can explain under what conditions, and what it did for you to actually to learn about how to use a pro forma and how to construct one.
Well, I think the pro formas really helped me understand the assumptions. There's not always, they're not ideal conditions in budgeting, right? There are things that for sure. There are things that are kind of outliers that you don't necessarily have a handle on. And the pro forma allows you to take all of these things into consideration to generate your best possible guess on how a project or a deal will come through. And that's the same with budgeting, right? So, we talked about cash flow and development, people having a better sense of their projection. This year you're going to have the third year of a government contract. And that every year you get $25,000 from an individual donor who's done this for the last 15 years, and it's pretty consistent, right? So you have that understanding, but you also now say, well, we might be in a recession, or salaries are increasing, or those types. So it was just an opportunity, like I said earlier, is to quantify all the qualitative, quantify all of the risk, quantify all of the stuff that you read about and see in the newspaper, and it makes it and put it in a place to help you to kind of make sense of what the future might hold. And to Beth's point, that you have to, that's the opportunity to really do your rigor, like be very rigorous and to be very you know, like you have looked at everything yourself. And then when you explain your assumptions to people, then people are like, oh, when your board hears, well, you took into consideration inflation. You know, I was just I had a board meeting this week, and we were talking about salary increases, and people were saying, well, you know, are we concerned that we need to adjust salaries for inflation? And what I said was, well, we've already brought our salaries within up to market, right? Because, and that's going up higher than kind of what we perceive as inflation. So I did my due diligence and I was able to show it. And you know, like I said, that's the fun part for me. That's the exciting part for me. And sometimes you don't get it right all the time, right? Sometimes you're like, you know, you might be too enthusiastic or too bullish around certain things. And you'll get, you know, it'll come back at you. But the thing is that when you at least say you've had a process and you've been able to kind of put all these things in your spreadsheet or in your pro forma, many people appreciate that and will take those kind of missteps as more information for the future, not information for like to, you know, to cut you at your knees. So there you go.
Thanks. Marvin, how about you? I know you have if you don't touch on it yourself, I'm going to bring something up that relates to what Dominique just said. But
Right.
how about you? What process or tool do you find really, you know, transformative in some way?
I really like to date my people. For me, it's the information I get from my people that informs what steps I need to do, right? Like I was saying, wrapping the ERC around the PPP, we were able to do that because I asked the development team, can you move, we just got a grant, I said, can you move the date of the funder from Q2 to Q3? So the auditor wouldn't say, what are you doing? You can't do ERC because this date, and I'm like, if they change the date, then we could get that money for Q2. And that's what we did. But had the development person not recognized the need of us getting that extra money of ERC for Q2, they wouldn't have understood my ask. But because I had trained them on cash flow, they know what I was asking for. For me, I highly depend on the people and the relationships internally and externally to help me move the work forward. Other than that, I would say it's really the technology and me able to really, you know how some people can cook chicken really well from nothing? I try to come from that standpoint with QuickBooks. Right, I try to use QuickBooks for as much power as it will allow me to, whether it's sending automatic reports to staff for department silos that are budget actuals and commenting on those, which helps them learn how to budget in the future, right? I'm always thinking of future, almost like I feel like I'm an X-Men thinking of future past future, to make sure that my people have the information and I have the information so they can make the best decisions. Did I miss anything, Ruth?
Well, I think what we should do is maybe go into, I wanted to talk a little bit about something that Dominique said when we first started talking about this, because Dominique did talk about the joy in doing this position well, in doing this role well, but she also talked about the power of that. And I wanted to just get back, because I think often we're embarrassed about, or a little shy about the power that is in the position of being able to understand how to manage the financial picture, and how to manage the financial conversations of the organization well, so that there's not a complete meltdown, or you keep those to, you know, to something which you can get through. But I wonder if maybe we could talk for a minute just about the power in the position and when you felt that really.
Guess I
Oh,
could start.
Go
Or you
ahead.
can call
Deborah.
us out. I'll be honest with you. It was during the pandemic where I really felt like I had a handle on it. I was scared. You know, running a not-for-profit is not for the faint of heart. And but what I knew for sure was what our financials look like. I was at another organization prior to this one. And because I knew what the financials looked like, I knew what needed to happen, right? I knew what calls I needed to make. I knew who I needed to light a fire under. I knew who I needed to kind of give space to. I knew who to pay, who not to pay. I knew kind of those things. I also felt that I was able to create systems and tools to build transparency around the decisions that were being made. You know, it was not everything was perfect, but the conditions weren't perfect or ideal. But because I had a comfort of understanding what my financials look like, I felt like I stood in authority. So power is sometimes can be a loaded word, but I think that I stood in authority of what I knew. And I was able to kind of take that to be able to move the organization forward. One of the reasons why I knew that I felt that way and I did everything. I did payroll. I did, I put financial reports together. I wrote the grants. I put the budgets together. I changed the, and I did that in partnership with people. But, sometimes it's very humbling to do payroll as a senior leader of an organization. It's very humbling. It is very humbling. It is very humbling to shake trees days before payroll needs to be submitted. Because then you actually understand how all of these things come together, and then ultimately you can make the right decisions. Earlier I talked about you choose which door to go into. That having a command and understanding all these different things allows you to make the best decisions for the organization in the moment. And that's what we needed during the pandemic. And then also applying for PPP and ERC and every other kind of relief grant opportunity. We felt confident because you had a sense of what was happening. So I think that that's really where I came into my authority.
Love that. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use that word power because, I mean, Dominique kind of said it's a little bit of a loaded term, and there is a lot of power in my position and in my role and in the knowledge that I hold. And there's a lot of good in that, right? There's a lot of good that I've learned, that I've been able to help move our organization forward. And there's also a lot about that I'm rather uncomfortable with, quite honestly. And I don't really like all of that power being here and my staff thinking like, oh, well, Beth, we've got to get Beth's permission. Right. And I'm like, no, we're doing this together. Right. We are all, and part of what I really try to do. And I inherited this role from, it was rather top heavy when I inherited it, because I think the past finance person and the past ED had kind of done what Dominique does. They had done everything. Right. And so they had done everything. So they did everything. And as a result, the rest of the staff they didn't really go near the budget. They didn't go near the finances. And so when I stepped in, I was in a fortunate position where I was able to kind of say to my program staff in particular, like, I actually want you guys more involved in the budgeting. I need to know more about what do you want to be doing for your, in a day-to-day, and let's find a way to put that into the budget so that then as the year goes on, you're empowered and you have the confidence to know like, yep, I don't have to ask for Beth's permission to do this. It's my money. Like we set aside this much. And if I choose to make this decision, then Beth will let me know that I only have this much money left to do these other decisions, right? And that's part of the like working with them that I have, and I really try to work on quite a bit. Because again, I don't want that to all be focused here. I want them to actually feel a sense of empowerment themselves, so that it's not this like scary, for example, like, oh, well, we only budgeted this much money. And I'm like, yeah, but we're way under budget over here. So if that means that we're going to buy like extra holiday presents for the youth this year, go for it. Because over here, I'm way under budget. But it's only in conversations with them that they can begin to feel that sense of power themselves that I have, because I'm like, and I'll do the analysis and I will let you guys know as the year's going on where we are, what's making me a little bit nervous, and what I'm like, no, actually, go for it. It's, we're getting towards the end of the fiscal year and we've got some extra dollars and development's been really successful this year. So yeah, let's do that. That sounds like a lot of fun.
How about you, Marvin?
Yeah, power is kind of a loaded word. I'm going to change it to chicken, fried chicken. So if I could, so I'm like, I would think that we all can make fried chicken, but you're really making fried chicken for your organization to serve as either as membership or as constituents. And you want that fried chicken to be good. So you need the ingredients in the chicken. Like you need a kitchen, you need an oven, you need some good oil, you need some good flour, right? You need those main ingredients, but you still have to replenish the ingredients, right? Because you need chicken, right? So I would say for me, my superpower is I try to make sure we have all the ingredients and that we're on budget to keep the chicken flowing, right? And also to keep the chicken tasteful, because nobody wants bad chicken.
That's for sure. Yeah. Sure, everyone can agree with that. So I want to talk a little bit about, how the participants are viewing this. And first to tell you that one participant said, not a question, but a statement. The fact that you guys are talking about this is such an inspiration and a gift. So I just want to pass that along. This is, it's interesting when I was trying to think about how to put this thing together, besides just thinking about let people just present what their realities are and what the important things in their realities are. What struck me is what a profession this really is, that it is a profession. And there are things you have to learn and have to learn the details of, and then have to observe the interactions of, and then have to do small experiments and see what the results are of, that really do make this what it is. And in the midst of all of that, you're consulting other people all the time to find out, well, did you try this? And what effect did it have on you? And then something new comes in from your environment that you didn't expect that changes the whole picture. And so it is this very, it is a very professional practice that it needs a lot of knowledge of the details and the way processes work. What happens when your billings get too old? What is it about that? What happens if you're constantly having to take from your line of credit? What does that cause, in every way in the organization? What happens if you have too little restricted money? All of those questions become the questions that you end up raising and have to raise in a way that people are going to have these productive conversations about them and not fall into disaster thinking. So I do want to say, I feel like in the end, this discussion is really about what a completely what a strong profession this really is for the amount that we talk about it, which is practically not at all. This is a strong profession with a set of shared values and practices and tools that we need to be able to surface so that we can all see it in each other. So I just want to say that before I start asking you some questions from the participants. And for the participants, if you can still ask questions if you want to, so that we can get some of your stuff answered. I do want to say if you end up moving, clicking off before the end of this, that on the forums on nonprofitfinancials.org, you're going to find all of the follow-up kind of observations and thoughts and ideas that come out of this webinar, and you can get conversation started there. So make sure that you do click in there. So I love this, Marvin. And again, this isn't just a question, but it's something that I'd like for you to talk about. Mary Anton says, I agree with Marvin. Budgeting is an iterative process involving all of the people you date. Consensus agreement is important, and the people involved in the discussion also need to understand they have responsibility for meeting goals, whether revenue, income, or outflow of expenses is involved. And so I'd like for you to talk about that. There's this thing, it almost is like you're in a polyamorous relationship, the way we're talking about it. We're not just dealing with a duo here. We're dealing with, and all of them are bringing their own sets of values. So can you talk a little bit more about when you're budgeting, what does that show up like? When do you start? Who do you involve at what point? How do you introduce new ideas into a budget so it's not just a redo of old budgets and assumptions?
Right. We start with folks dreaming and writing. And we start with the budgeting process that way because we know that everybody's not a financial mindset head. So we start with them dreaming with their budgets and writing. And we ask for big dreams. We don't ask for funky dreams. We ask for big dreams. And then we don't talk about cutting their dreams until later down the process. That starts around September when we're a calendar year. And then we move to eventually out of their dreams, making a mission for their dreams, aligned with the mission and vision and values of the organization. And then from there, we move to making it numerical, which is really hard for people who haven't done that before. Like when we say you can go to 2 conferences, how much is that? And we break that down, we give them helps. We help them along that process, which is fine. And then I take all those dreams and make them numerical values with my finance team. And usually my executive director freaks. She goes, what did y'all want to do? We're like a $3 million organization. It'll come back like a dream. A dream budget usually starts at 4.5. And she's like, wait, what did they say? I'm like, you told them to dream. So this is the dream. And then from there, it goes, so all the dreams go up and then the dreams come back down kind of. She'll say, oh, let's make it down to like 3.2 or something, or like 4. Like, what does it look like? And then we go down and then we go back to the folks and say, now you have to dream by decreasing amounts. And then we have them decrease their amounts based on what? And we don't say you have to cut a percentage or an amount. We just say we need you at least 2 or 3 decreasing amounts that we may need to cut. And then we deal with those silo leads, and then we work with them to see what they shouldn't cut, what they should cut, what they can cut, what they can't cut. And that takes around a month. And it's actually quite heavy dental work, if I can say that. So it's kind of painful for folks. I'm enjoying it, but I know they're like, oh my God, this finance meeting is taking forever. But I'm loving that part because then I can actually see, okay, because also my job as a finance CFO, I want to make sure that I'm supporting folks in the mission and the values of the organization and the programs. I don't want to see a program not supported, right? So I may flag to the ED or to the department head, hey, you may need more money here because this is what you want to do and this is not going to be the cost. Right, I'm the realistic person, and then we go back and forth, and then we settle on a final budget, and then we begin involving the finance committee, and that goes a couple of rounds. And the finance committee is not so much heavily in the departmental dreams, but just the organizational dreams, and we have a write-up for those. And then once that gets approved, maybe 2 or 3 rounds, and then we go to the board. And pretty much by the board, we've given everything from that we can. Because I come from the standpoint of giving all decision makers the most amount of information that's clearest and decipherable so they can just make a decision, as opposed to asking more questions. If someone at that level is asking a ton of questions, then for me, I think I haven't delivered in explaining correctly for them. So I err on, it's almost like trying to get your 3-year-old to eat broccoli. I try to make sure they have all the information about how wonderful broccoli is before I introduce it. Or if I know they don't like broccoli, I kind of give it to them in a burger, right? It's fine in a burger. And then, I'm like, this is what we need, this is what we're going to do. And they're like, okay, I love broccoli. But I try to make sure that the board and the finance team knows exactly what we're doing. And we answer all their questions if they have them. And sometimes we go back, right? We have an answer. They have more questions, something we haven't thought of. We're like, okay, we want you to know, because we don't want any board member to not know. We want them to know everything.
Right.
And that's our process in general, right? It's not painstaking to me, but I think it's painstaking to the staff. And we're still working on how to make it painstaking, because I don't know how you make something joyful to someone who has proclaimed they hate numbers. So we're trying to make that switch, and I'll let you know if I have an idea. But for now,
Well, maybe one of the participants will, and they'll put it in the forum. So how about if we go to another question, which one of the people asked a question about what's the use of budgeting out for multi-years. What does that allow you to do differently? Is it worth it? How do you manage that? So I don't know if any of you have that experience.
I do. I do, because you have sometimes you have multi-year contracts or multi-year grants or multi-year. And so I think it helps you to have a real picture of your revenue and your expenses. And it also allows you, as I talked earlier about, like really look at some of the assumptions, look at, some of the changes in pricing, salary adjustments and shifts. That makes you better. I think it also helps your board understand the commitment that they make when they are agreeing to multi-year contracts or multi-year grants, because as we know, government contracts, they don't pay for everything. And so, when you are working with your boards have to be able to say, it's not just about this year raising money, it's about the out years. And I happen to have a government background. So it's always, you're always looking at the out years. You're always looking at, up to 2 more fiscal years ahead of you. And so getting in that mindset actually helps you, and it positions you as leaders in your organization to really be clear about what your program should be, what the needs are, so that you can achieve the goals.
This brings me to another question, which comes in part from a participant, but I'm adding my little whatever to it, which is, somebody says, Marvin, it sounds like you're only dating within your organization. How can that be so? And that brings me to back to the issue of how you work social capital while you're thinking financially about the organization, and how intertwined those two pools of resources are. And I wonder if someone could talk to that, because it's such an important point. Beth, do you want to start?
Yeah, I have to admit that I was still thinking a little bit about what Dominique was just talking about.
Oh, well, go ahead. Go.
One of the things that I was going to add is that, Marvin has started all of this by calling all of us artists. And I just want to bring to the table how we're also scientists, right? So when you're doing the process that Dominique was just talking about, you're making assumptions about the out years. You're doing some predictions. And it's so incredibly important to write down your hypotheses, write down your assumptions.
Oh, yeah.
And literally, like I just put sentences in there where I'm like, this is the assumption I made, not sure if it's right or not. But that also then helps you go back as the year goes going on and be like, oh, whoa, that was totally wrong. Or, hey, actually, we were kind of right on with that idea. And that helps then as you're going through the iterative process. So I just really want to, I'm constantly, what's my hypothesis about what's going to happen? And did it happen? So that's the science part of it. You talked about social capital.
I just want to say that what that relates to in part is also you're bringing up the algebra thing. Because if the formula does not work out, you got to admit it and try it in another way. I mean, and that's a constant. It's a constant part of this. Like I'm expecting this response rate. I only got this. Well, what does that mean about what part of what I did? You know, and it's important. It's constant experimentation and judging for the hypotheses, right?
Yep.
But go ahead, Ben.
So I think you were asking about the importance of social capital and talking to colleagues outside of the organization. Is that what the question was? Okay. Again, I kind of go back to what I said earlier, which was I never hesitate to pick up a phone. And I will also once again make a plug for Propel for nonprofits, because thanks to COVID, now many of their webinars now rather than in person, and they've got amazing resources. So when you were asking earlier about like what are tools that you've used, I was like, oh well, that was from Propel. Oh, that was from Propel. Oh, that was from Propel. So like true program costs, for example, like how do I figure out what the true program cost is? So it's not just the direct cost of the program, right? It's also you have to add in what are the costs of admin and development? Because this program couldn't exist if we didn't have our admin and our development teams as well. And how do I put that in such that I know if that program went away? So in this my organization, actually this year, we did have a program that we had to end. And then there was a whole bunch of like rejiggering because there's a bunch of costs that are across the organization that I'd kind of said, well, this chunk is going to this program. And now all of a sudden I had to say, all of our other programs just got a little bit more expensive. Right? Because I had to take our admin and our development costs and I had to now put them into 4 programs rather than 5 programs. And that was a little bit like, wait, what happened to my budget? Why did that change? And I was like, well, here's why. Again, there are tools out there and that's one of those things where it's like, I called a colleague and I kind of said like, how do I handle the closing of a program? Don't hesitate to do that. And don't hesitate to kind of like attend to webinars like this and then follow up with people afterwards with like, I think you kind of talked about that. Could you maybe give me some advice? I mean, I believe that in the nonprofit world, we're not in competition with each other. We're supposed to be collaborating with each other, right? We're supposed to be making this world better together. And so there's no reason to not share with one another tools that we have, lessons that we've learned, such that nobody ever has to recreate a wheel. No one ever has to try to figure out on their own from scratch, what do I do about the situation?
Right. I'm gonna stop it there. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. This is just so interesting to me, and it's like telling a story that we haven't told yet completely. And so in that way, it's both very familiar and very exciting, right? I want to ask each of the panelists to just make a quick statement about what this has felt like for you, you know, and what you look forward to in this conversation. And then I'm going to say something very quick about the panel, about the participants registering for the forums, and we'll end. Okay, so Dominique, let's have you first because I know you're on a hard stop.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for having this conversation. This has been affirming for me as a professional, as a leader, as someone who really has, I think, picked all of this up by experience, not necessarily in the classroom, that I'm moving in the right direction. And I want people who are on the call, and I've saw in the Q&A, there people are grappling with a lot of issues. I see a lot of board challenges. I see a lot. I said you need to understand that you have the tools to be able to affect change within your organization and get the resources that you need and to move those resources in support of your mission. And so, part of the struggle is being able to understand the struggle, but then also being able to find allies both in and outside of your organization to help you to respond to it. So give you all good encouragement and good vibes, and know that there are folks out here who are rooting for you.
Great. Yes. Thank you so much, Dominique. Beth?
Okay, I was having a hard time unmuting myself, sorry. Yeah, I would just say this has been such an honor to be part of this conversation, and it has been very affirming for myself as well. You know, I started by saying that in the beginning of my career, I thought you had to be kind of on the program side to be a change agent. And it's been in the latter part of my career that I've realized that, like, oh, that's not true at all, right? We're all change agents. We're just playing different roles in service of that goal. And participating today has just kind of reminded me that, like, oh yeah, no, like, we kick ass. Like, I'm sorry, but like, we do, right? We do amazing work. And it's really fun to kind of think about, like, and what's the joy in that work? Because, you know, I come home from work and my husband, like, he works in marketing. And so he's always like talking to muckety muck people. And he's always like, oh, I spoke to so-and-so today. What'd you do today? And I'm like, I drew down the last of the admin in a federal grant. But for me, I'm like, yes, I totally finished the admin costs, right? But it's just not, it's not fun to talk about, right? So today it's been fun to talk about that stuff.
And Marvin?
I will say again, date your people, right? The finance people, the CEOs, and the treasurer, the Devo people. To the person who wonders if the finance person is dating the Devo, external Devo people, usually that's, if you don't have a Devo person, then you would be dating them. But if you have a Devo person, they would be dating them. To answer that. And I have been following Propel nonprofits while I'm living in my organization's in New York City and they're in Minnesota. I have been following them since their old name of Nonprofit Assistance Fund. So I'm a stalker of nonprofit organizations, ops groups, and this is a brilliant one. So if you haven't seen the Propel Nonprofits resource page, it's bomb diggity, and that's an old term, and I apologize, but it's bomb diggity, right? Whatever the young people say, you can use a synonym and transpose it. I would also offer you, as you wrap the year up, I know you're working your ass off. I would appreciate each of you if you would give yourselves a little grace. Sometimes I think we work so hard to get the audit, the budget, the checks out, the payroll done. I think that's really, like, it's kind of exhaustive, but I think we can give ourselves grace, and it's okay. And you don't have to have any excuses. You just say, you can tell your staff, I'm going to give myself some grace and we're going to do X. Right, I'm take a break. It's totally fine. And you can even say, I said so. I can take the call. I'm okay with supporting each of you. I want to give you that as we go into the new year, and may you have an amazing, prosperous, resource-filled 2 weeks vacation minimum, 4 weeks if you're good year. And I send you all much love.
Well, with that, thank you, Marvin. I do want to say, Marvin is on the board of the nonprofit Financial Commons, which thank you very much. And we hope you all will get much more involved. Dominique was one of the people on the design committee. We take very seriously that we're following the questions from the field, not the other way around. We're not leading this discussion. The discussion is led from the field. And so it's really important that everybody go register for the forums, and we've placed the link in the either the chat or the Q&A box for you to easily do that. But also we'll be doing a follow-up to this conversation. There are questions that we didn't answer. We'll answer them in there. I'll ask the panelists, if they will, to keep an eye on the forums and answer any questions that they can individually, and be as responsive as they can to you. And I really appreciate you coming today. It's been a pleasure, and I've learned a ton, as I always do. Thank you very much, Marvin and Dominique and Beth, for making yourselves so available. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thanks, Ruth. Bye-bye. Thanks, Dominic. Thanks,
Holidays,
Beth.
everybody. Thank you, everyone.